you realize the ability to meet a moment with a creative spark is going to mean a lot for these folks if they're going to be successful on the road ahead. I always tell people who want to get into this topic to read Pink. Daniel Pink, his notion of the 6 conceptual senses is an interesting framework to think about whether or not your students are going to have these skill sets. These 6 core skill sets that he says are necessary for the conceptual age. Skill sets of design. Do they understand aesthetics and design? What company really gets design and aesthetics probably better than anybody in the technology world? Apple. Apple gets it. It's not about the 500 functions that can be done with your MP3 player. It's about the 5 things you can do with your iPod, and then it looks cool, right? They get design, they get aesthetics, and they're able to connect with people in a different way. Things like story. Do you understand that human meaning is communicated through story more than anything else? And that stories really matter in terms of connecting with individuals? The whole notion of empathy and play and meaning being so important. My favorite notion of Pink's is symphony. The notion of symphony is understanding that it's not about tolerating diversity or respecting diversity. Symphony means you can look at diverse elements and pull them together to play a symphony. Okay? You're able to really think how pieces and parts can come together in a whole different way. That's a totally different skill set than just tolerating something, isn't it? Okay? But that means you've got to be creative at thinking how these pieces and parts can actually come together. Again, the question is, do our students have those skills? Are they going to develop those skills? What can we do to help them become better critical learners, better creative learners than they were when they first walked in the door? Which is a big kind of question. In fact, the OER Commons resource I showed you earlier, one of the big projects right now, are students actually working with faculty members to create learning objects. And the idea is for them to create learning objects that then can be shared with the next generation of students that come through that course to learn more effectively. And the idea is to get a creative community that gets smarter over time and actually allows you to kind of go to the next level with the kind of learning you can do. Then there's a whole series of conversations around the notion of social learning. Social learning, and this is one of the biggest points, is making sure you understand the difference between technical competence, okay? Technical competence versus interpersonal efficacy. Can they get along with other people? Individually, in teams, in larger groups, it's a big deal. Okay? How do most people get jobs in this country? How do most people get jobs? A social network. It's not because of their degree, I hate to say it. It's because of who they know. The degree gives them a pass to get in the door, but the who they know really gets them to closing it. Why are most people fired in this country? Outside of economic downturn, why are most people terminated from their jobs, fired? If you look at the SHRM data and the American Management Association data, they're crystal clear. Most people are fired because of interpersonal conflict. They can't get along with other people. They often use another reason to fire them, but the real reason they're firing them is because they can't get along with other people and they can't get along with them. In fact, SHRM actually calls it the jerk effect. Either you're fired because you are a jerk or you're fired by a jerk, but there's always a jerk involved. And the challenge is we sometimes help our students get the impression that their discipline or their degree will get them and keep them a job. Is it true? No. Those social skills mean something. And it's one of the reasons why, if you look at that, again, people talk about the hard skills versus the soft skills. Calling these soft skills is ridiculous. These are obviously very hard to learn. Okay? By the way, great book to read, The Hard Truth About Soft Skills, workplace lessons smart people wish they would have learned earlier. Great book. They're talking about the notion that all organizations are political, all of them have culture, all of them involve people, and you've got to figure out how you roll that in. Again, Goldman's book on social intelligence really talks about this notion. It also helps you realize that teaching and learning is a social enterprise, and your small messages leave memorable impacts for years and not a lifetime for many of these students as you're doing it. But if you're thinking about that impact, it's one of the reasons why people are really into engagement research right now, to find out how engaged these students are. And they're focused on things like mindfulness and how connected they can be to these students. But people are using things like project-based learning. By the way, all these links are active for resources for you to check out on your own. For project-based learning, collaborative learning, service learning, socially networked learning are things that people are using in their instruction, not necessarily because they teach the concepts better than anything else. They're using it because they want the students to learn the social skills necessarily to work on a project, right? To work in teams. All of us hate collaborative learning at one level because there's always a team that blows up, right? And there's 4 people from that group who come to you and tell you they're going to kill the 5th person. because they're not pulling their weight and all hell's breaking loose. Will that ever happen to them in the workplace?
Yes.
Yeah. You're on the committees right now when that's happening. Okay? And what we need to think about is the fact that part of this is those lessons of life, right? Habits of mind that they have to learn to be able to do this. And that's why things like project-based learning and collaborative learning and socially network learning really matter for these folks. I really like this notion of personal learning networks, however, because it's the idea that in a deeply connected, socially networked world, our students need to be able to use their critical thinking skills to kind of flush out who are the valuable connections to help me learn at a higher level. And where can I learn from within that social network, from formal resources to informal resources. I have learned some of the most amazing things from colleagues I've met on Twitter and Facebook who I've never met personally, who are in Australia, who are in Asia, and we've suddenly created a relationship and are sharing all kinds of resources back and forth. It's a part of my personal learning network now, and it's created a different way of kind of connecting with people in some way. There are different skill sets you need to think about and how they're going to pull those resources together on the social level to go to the next level of these things. And then the last one is the notion of courageous learning. And courageous learning is this idea of helping students unlearn old things and learn new things. Right? Do you think that's going to be useful for them? Yes. The rate of change is a little bit quick right now. Okay? And for us to think about how they can unlearn things and learn new things is going to be an important conversation to have. And we have to deal with that. We have to deal with, and also just be willing to try some new things. We have to find homeostasis, right? Homeostasis is that wonderful physical and psychological term that talks about kind of steady state, right? It's a thermostat. If it gets too hot, it makes it colder. If it gets too cold, it makes it hotter. When your physiological states, you know this. If you've ever tried to diet, right? Because the minute you start losing weight, you get really hungry, which makes you want to come back up. And when you start gaining weight, the belt's too tight, which makes you want to come back down, right? So everyone's going to try to, but psychologically that happens. Have you ever had a student who comes from a disadvantaged background without a lot of sense of self-worth, who suddenly starts doing really well in school and then self-sabotages and something kills themselves and then destroys their opportunity? Yeah. And again, it's about horrible homeostasis and thinking through how you can combat that in some way. So I talked about the autopilots this morning, about your brain wanting to do these kinds of things, right? Again, it goes back to that steady state and automated connection. Like the 30-minute drive you take to work where you don't remember a single thing. Other things like you finish your shower and realize you have no idea if you washed your hair or not. You're just naked, you're in there, but you don't remember at all. Okay? You, in a group of friends, and someone brings up a TV character, and every member of the group can picture the face, but you can't remember the name. It's like a collective brain disease, right? As you're in it. You forget how to spell thought as you're writing a note. It just doesn't look right. Yeah? And then I come from a big family, so I love this one. You have a hard time remembering someone's name, and you gave birth to them. It's a real problem for some folks. I'm persuaded by this idea. And James Zoll from The Art of Changing the Brain and a host of others are big advocates of this idea. That there's something about rookie courage that is important. And rookie courage is having the courage to go in and actually be a rookie. Can you relate? Can you remember when you were in a situation, you might be in it now, where you're a rookie, where everybody else seems to know everything about what's going on, but you're the one flailing and trying to figure out what's happening in that situation? There's something, by the way, that's incredibly good for your brain in that process. In fact, the neuroscientists say that neuroplasticity is enhanced by you having rookie experiences at least once a year. In fact, my line is, be a rookie every year. Try something. By the way, it doesn't have to be in your discipline. It can be horseback riding, knitting, martial arts, I don't care. Anything that makes you feel like a fool when you first start. It's true. It's good for you to walk in and feel like a fool and have to figure out how to make sense of an environment. And by the way, who are you surrounded by every day? You're surrounded by people who are swimming in rookie courage. They're trying things for the first time. In fact, I wrote an article, I'll talk about in a minute, called Courage to Learn a few years ago, which talks about the fact that our work, we're surrounded by rookie courage, right? People who are walking in, they pretend like they know everything, okay? But the truth is they're having to figure out they don't know hardly anything, and they're having to learn a bunch of things to be able to kind of go to the next level. Now, this is where these things intertwine. Part of courageous learning is the ability to do risk-reward analysis, which is where critical learning comes in. And part of risk-reward analysis is figuring out when is it right to step in and try to learn something new, and when is it right to stay with what you're already doing. Because sometimes it's very smart to be the second mouse to the cheese, right? You want somebody else to go first, and then you want to come in after the fact. That's one of the reasons why social networks are so valuable, because they'll tell you, do not waste your time on that. Okay? I remember back in the 90s being in workshops where people were saying, all faculty members should learn how to program HTML so they can develop web resources for their courses. And inside I'm going, are you insane? They're not going to learn how to program HTML. There are going to be resources that will do that for them, over time. They should not waste their time learning how to program and learn code. That's where, again, that risk-reward analysis comes in, where people can take it to the next level. Some great books to read, by the way, on this topic. 5 Minds for the Future. Howard Gardner talks about this idea a lot, about this idea of, are you able to unlearn and learn something new as a core feature of your mental state. The Art of Changing the Brain talks about this in the teaching and learning context. James Zoll from Case Western really does a good job of linking it to your teaching and learning process. And in the kind of being entrepreneurial with yourself role, the book Life Entrepreneurs, wonderful book. It talks about how modern entrepreneurs are not about killing themselves to create a great business. They're about being entrepreneurial to create a great life. And what they're trying to do is shape a life that really fits them. And it's a very different kind of perspective. But part of it means knowing when you need to learn new things and being willing to jump into those learning enterprises and do things in a different way. My favorite quote from Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman philosopher from the early 20th century, said, in times of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned usually find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. Okay? And it's the idea of continually learning and challenging yourself to continually learn and be willing to be a little goofy sometimes so you can learn something new and kind of experience that in a whole different way. Again, the Courage to Learn is linked here in the article to students. It's a message we wrote to students back in 2004 through the League for Innovation. It was an open letter to students talking about their courage to learn. I probably get at least 300 letters a year from different students who will read that article because it's used in orientation programs around the country, because it talks about their courage to be able to step in and learn something new. Those are the big four. The notion of the critical, creative, social, and courageous learning. And here's the charge, folks. If you look at those skill sets, and you have to say, our students have challenges in these areas. Being critical learners, creative learners, social learners, and courageous learners. And there are things we can do to help them get there. But one of the things we have to remember is we're wrestling with our own changes, right? These are some of the strategic planning workshop things I do with colleges, helping them realize that we have students, learning swirl means we have students coming at all different ages and stages. We're wrestling with the impact of globalization, partnership with K-12 and higher education, changing the way we fundraise and move into more private fundraising along with our grant writing and entrepreneurship, leveraging technology and figuring out how we use that at a higher level, developing action analytics teams and really getting more insightful about our use of research. And we're really trying to think about our role in democracy, right? The democracy imperative. All things we're wrestling with. The question is, again, go back to that question of insanity we talked about, right? Okay, how if we're going to do some things differently, again, the question is, are we willing to step in? If you're a parent, you know this. Your kids learn most by watching who? And do they listen to what you say, or do they watch what you do? They watch what you do. In fact, and that is an athletic phrase that says they don't watch your lips, they watch your hips, right? They watch what you do, they don't listen to what you say. Guess who our students are watching as we deal with change? Okay? And we want them to be critical learners, creative learners, social learners, and courageous learners. Guess what? They're figuring out, are we critical learners in terms of thinking about what's happening in our own environments? Are we really tough-minded about what's working and what's not working in our own environments? Are we creative in thinking about different solutions we can bring to bear? Or do we have a creative environment where we value creativity? In fact, one of the Maricopa Community Colleges used to be fond of saying they were known for innovation, but they really should be known for the 3 times more creative failures. The whole idea is they're willing to fail. They're willing to try some different kinds of things. That's a culture. They're watching to see whether or not social learning is happening here. Are we civil with each other? Or can we really work with each other in a whole different way? And the notion of courageous learning. Do we have the courage to actually try some new things? Does that make sense? If we want them to learn these things, guess what? We've got evidence of these things in our own environment. We're going to have these conversations. But here's the big challenge. It's remembering a couple of things. One, all change is relative. I have a number of different pictures on the slide here. Who knows what's in the upper left-hand corner? That's a Second Life island. That's someone teaching a course in Second Life, which is the virtual world. Just leveraging technology. That's a huge change for some people. They can't even imagine going into Second Life and doing that kind of work. Just using computers to teach and using online resources. This is a picture from a school in India that just got their first slates. Okay? And they had to do faculty development. They had to get the teachers ready to teach with slates because they never had that as a resource. And it took at least a year for them to get all that process unrolled. Teaching with slates. Okay? All change is relative for us. We need to remember that and think about the fact we're trying to bring people to do some things in different ways and have some conversations about what makes sense for this context. But also remember this as you do this work. Whenever you engage in these kind of conversations, there will be two groups that will come out loud and proud from the beginning. One group I call the caustic cynics. Caustic cynics are angry about everything. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. You bring manna from heaven, it's too salty for them. They're mad, right? A friend of mine calls them cave people, colleagues against virtually everything. Now, how many of you can think of a cave person or a caustic cynic, maybe not in this environment, but in some environment in your world, right? Okay. Now, if you're not shaking your hand or raising your hand, you might be. They're only equaled in the problems they cause, and they are equaled. They're equaled by the true believers. The true believers overpromise and underdeliver, and they cut the credibility out of your initiatives. They tell you everybody should be doing online learning. Everybody should be doing collaborative learning. Whatever they're into, everybody should be doing. And what happens is those extremes end up dominating the dialogue. And everyday people walk up to those arguments, which tend to be, by the way, led by bullies. They tend to be psychological bullies. They're very loud. They're very abusive. And everyday people walk up to that dialogue and go, I'm going back to work, right? They just don't want to deal with it. If you really want to wrestle with this and have the kind of conversations you need to go to the next level, you have to have the courage to calm down the caustic cynics, temper the true believers, and create what I would call a reasoned center, right? Thoughtful critics, careful advocates willing to chew on what's going on in a civil way and really figure out what the next steps might be. And by the way, I don't think that's a president or a vice president that does that. I think it's an academic community, staff community, and others that come together and they create that kind of environment, that kind of culture to roll forward, which I think has some really positive things for the road ahead. Now, this afternoon, we're going to spend some time diving deeper into topics around teaching in particular. Again, I encourage you to connect on the blog or on the Catalytic Conversations blog. There's a full reading list for the things we talked about at markmiller.com. If you want to look at the reading section, it's in there. I'm on all the social networks. If you want a friend on Facebook, connect on Twitter. If you want to do anything with LinkedIn, feel free to do all that. It's about expanding the personal learning network. But it's being willing, again, having the courage to step in and try some different things. Thanks, folks.
Does anybody have any questions? We have time to field some questions.
Hello?
On your website, can we find the books that you suggested?
Yeah, there's two ways. One is, again, you're getting the PowerPoint presentation, and all the books are linked out to Amazon for you to be able to order, or there's references for them. And then on the website at markmiller.com, there's a readings section, and that has the bibliography in there.
Thank you.
So,
After lunch, the third session begins at 2 o'clock. It's wonderful. Dr. Miller and I talked on this topic at BADE in November '07, the power of practical magic. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Teaching faculty especially, I think you'd be very happy to attend.
a study of thousands of teaching excellence award winners kind of sharing their voices. You'll hear a lot more from them than you'll hear from me. Thanks again, folks.
Hi. I just have maybe just a contribution. I would like to know what you think about exchange program, because I know that if you go from one country to another, it's just like you don't know how to swim, but they throw you in the water, and you should adapt, and you should be learn from from other things that you might be you won't learn at school or university, but I would like to know what you think about that.
The cultural exchange programs and the value of them really go back to that notion of rookie courage. I think when you walk into a cultural exchange program, the students who've done it will tell you the same things. It's the sink or swim mentality. At first, they didn't think they'd survive. And then little by little, they put the pieces together and they created a structure for figuring out how to survive in that world. It's one of the reasons why language immersion programs work so well, because you have to learn the language when you're in that context and be able to pull it in. And there's some learning for us there. The willingness to step into an environment and not know anything and try to make sense of it over time and get some mentors and develop a learning network and be able to kind of go to the next phase with it. It's incredibly valuable. It's one of the reasons why some of the best learning exchange programs in the country, the universities and community colleges, really force students to think through this process and either do it physically or do it virtually. There are a lot of virtual exchange programs that are going on now where people are trying to get them to relate with people from other cultures, especially for folks who are in rural communities or in inner city communities where they literally have never gone 50 miles from where they were born in their entire life. It's an important thing for them to kind of be able to touch other cultures and be able to connect and learn more about what that's about. That's very fun.
I wasn't here in the first part, so I don't know if you discussed it, but what do you mean by mindfulness? And how do you believe it can be taught, and if so, how?
I'm a big believer in what Ed Hollowell talks about in terms of mindfulness, which is the idea of, it kind of goes back to, he said Gandhi, but it's where it is. It's that notion of being fully present within a moment. And I think for us, the skill set of that is a challenge because we're pushed towards persistent partial attention. We're in the divided mind state all the time. You know, I travel 200,000 miles a year, and every year someone's talking on their phone in a public restroom, right? And I don't know the etiquette. Am I allowed to flush? You know, I don't I mean, they're a divided mind right there. We're trying to figure it out. So for me, it's about, you know, I work with my kids on this whole notion of people first. And realizing, you know, I always say God invented TiVo for a reason, because you can push pause. And then you can turn and focus on the person and have a conversation. That means being present for that conversation. So that's what I really mean by that. Now, if I've got a minor in religion, so we talk about mindfulness at a deeper level. We can we can get a good cup of coffee and sit somewhere and talk for a bit on that. But I think that for me, it's really about that notion of whether or not you can be present in the moment and really understand what's happening in the moment. And I think that especially in teaching, this afternoon we'll talk about that a lot. There's a level of presence that's important for great teachers to be able to be aware of what's happening within that class and what's happening with the individual students. And by the way, I don't think technology necessarily gets in the way of that. Sometimes technology gives you tools and understanding ways of connecting with people you couldn't connect with otherwise. There are some students who will never open up in class, who will open up in other venues for you, and that means being present for those things as well.
Thank you.
Go eat, folks. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Thomas Nelson Community College Professional Development Series. I'm Denise Sitka from Workforce Development, and today I have the honor of introducing Dr. Mark Milgrom. Today's presentation summarizes the results of a national study of Teaching Excellence Award winners that resulted in the best-selling publication, Practical Magic, on the front lines of teaching excellence. Dr. Milgrom will give us a clear picture of what really works in teaching and learning. The title of his talk is The Power of Practical Magic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Milliron.
We're going to jump into the third part of our conversation for those of you who've been all the way through. For those of you who are just joining us, I might refer to some past things, but don't worry, you'll be able to access the PowerPoint. You'll be able to connect into those. And again, remember, don't worry, I'm very well aware of the fact that some people who use PowerPoint have no power nor point, as we talked about. We'll be very careful about that. The Power of Practical Magic study was an absolute pleasure to be a part of. It literally took us almost 5 years to get it done. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is to kind of walk through the premise for the study, how we structured it, and then really begin to share the voices of the faculty members who participated. Because literally thousands of faculty members were a part of the study, both the quantitative and qualitative pieces of it. And I'd like to get out of the way of their conversations. They shared some wonderful things about how they work their art. I've been a fan of great teaching for a long time. There's nothing I love better than to be in the room with somebody who is good at that art, right? And kind of really can take that to another level. So I want to share some of what they taught us in that process as we go into it. I've taught in multiple contexts. I've taught in universities, community colleges, guest lecture all around the world in different kinds of places. And for me, relating to this is always kind of fun to see how I could have done a lot better when I did some of these things. I still remember when I was teaching at Arizona State University. I used to teach interpersonal communication to a classroom of 500 students. Showing itself. But that reminds me of a story. When I was in, a couple years ago, I was flying from Charlotte, North Carolina to Los Angeles for a whole series of meetings. And it was after a week where I had meeting after meeting after meeting, and I got absolutely nothing done. You ever had one of those weeks? Yeah. So I had parked my work. I had 2 journal articles I was trying to finish. I had about 150 emails I had to answer. I had a paper I was working on. But I had 6 hours in that metal tube that was going to fly across country where I could focus on the things I worked on the airplane. So I got to the airport early, and I boarded the plane early, and I got into my aisle seat. And I started doing, that nonverbal thing you do when you're really busy and you want people to know you're really busy. So I'm looking very industrious, putting my folders away and getting my work area set up. And coming down the aisle is this flight attendant who was with her, bringing a 13-year-old girl who clearly has Down syndrome. And again, for those of you who are here in the morning, I come from a family of 9 kids. I have an African-American brother, Native American brother, Korean sister. In addition to that, we had more than 25 foster kids who rotated through our house. My mom was a special needs nurse who specialized in children with special needs. And again, my dad was out of his mind within that. But as they were coming down the aisle, I recognized that beautiful smile right away. And I thought to myself, the universe has an amazing sense of balance. All I want to do is work and put my head down. She is going to sit right next to me. Nothing wrong with that. I just knew that's how it was going to work. And sure enough, the flight attendant comes down and taps me on the shoulder, and I get up. And she puts the girl into the window seat. And I sit down in the aisle seat. And then the flight attendant leans across me like I'm not even there. Oh, honey, there's nothing to worry about. This flight's about 6 hours. If you have any problems, push this orange button. I'll run back here and help you. If you have any questions, ask this nice man right here. Thanks. Fully nominated now. So she takes off, and I kind of look over at the girl, and you can just see, literally see how nervous she was. She's looking in all different directions, and I'm kind of trying to catch her eye. She kind of looks right at me and stares. She goes, "What's your name?" I'm like, "My name's Mark. What's yours?" She goes, "My name's Gina. You're going to be my new best friend." I'm like, okay. And so we started talking, and I don't know, how many of you spend time with kids with Down syndrome? Good, there's a number of you here. You'll get that they really take Gandhi's admonition seriously, that the greatest gift you can give to another human being is to be truly present with them. They are really with you. So much so they talk rather loudly. Whether you like it or not, other people are in on your conversation. And so she starts telling me, where are you going? She's like, "I'm going to Los Angeles to see my grandmother. I love my grandmother." And I'm like, "I love my grandmother too." And other people, "Oh, really? You love? I love my grandmother. Oh, that's so sweet. What does she do? She makes cookies. Really? What kind of cookies? Chocolate chip." And other people start jumping in. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Disneyland." "Really? We love Disneyland. It's a small world." Other people start jumping in. And then it's going back and forth. I kind of step back from this conversation and realize she has like 12 people talking to her now. She has her own little fan club. We haven't left the gate yet. She's got this whole support network going. And I'm kind of superfluous to it now. And we're kind of in the conversation, but then somewhere in that opening foray of dialogue, she lets out that she's never flown before. She literally says these words. She goes, "These things crash, don't they?" So the woman in front of me decides to be helpful, so she turns around and she goes, "Oh, Gina, I used to be afraid of flying myself. I just tell myself it's no big deal. So just tell yourself it's no big deal." So for the next 5 minutes, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. I'm thinking to myself, it's going to be a big deal. And right about then, we pulled back from the gate and started taxiing down the runway. And as we're going down the runway, I kind of look over at Gina, and bless her heart, you can tell she is scared. She is really beginning to get nervous. And I'm trying to figure out what the right thing to do, what the appropriate thing to do is, maybe from the hand of her arm, something to try to calm her down. And we're just going as fast as can be to the bottom of the runway. And I can't even think fast enough to figure out what the right thing to do is. We get right to the bottom of the runway, and boom, the engines catch full blast. And we start boogieing down the runway, we go into the ascent. And then I look over, first of all, I think it was funny, the person in front of me must be a yoga practitioner, because she's in her seat, will turn completely around looking at Gina, and I kind of look over at Gina, and bless her heart, she is completely shaking from head to toe. She just grabbed the window so hard you could see the whites of her knuckles. She has grabbed the armrest so forcefully there's cushion coming from between her fingers. And she is completely quaking, and suddenly her eyes start rolling back in her head. I'm thinking it's a grand mal, something really bad is happening here. She's full shake and quake. We're at the top of the ascent. Suddenly she just drops head right down in her lap. She's out. Everyone's looking at me like I'm supposed to do something. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just about to burst out of my buckle to go get help. And suddenly she pops up and goes, just kidding. Thanks, Gina. That was the tip of the iceberg of Gina's humor. She was irreverent, hilarious, unbelievable. But I think it was soon right after that I realized I'm not getting much work done on this flight. And I literally took my folders out of the seat pocket in front of me, put it into the briefcase in front of me, put it underneath, and just was present for that. And even though I didn't get a lot of work done, I'm still talking about it today. Right? It was one of the most enjoyable times of my life. We laughed so hard. You ever laugh so hard the next day your face hurts? That's what it really was. And we just had a phenomenal time, all 15 of us. And I can tell you, the guy behind me, there was a guy behind me who was not enjoying any of this. He was so mad and all this kind of laughing and frivolity was going on the airplane. He was clearly very focused. He must have had a lot of work to do himself. He had his tray table down the entire time. And it sounded like for 6 hours he was going through some kind of gorilla grunt syndrome, because this is all I heard for 6 hours behind me. Every kind of monosyllabic grunt you can imagine came out of that guy for 6 hours. It was really bad. After a while, we were kind of joking about the kind of sounds that were coming. When we landed in Los Angeles, we got off the plane, and all 15 of us wanted to give her grandmother a group hug. So we met her, and we went down to the baggage plane where we're all talking with Gina and her grandmother. And this guy, I kid you not, he gets his bag, red-faced and angry, and makes sure he rolls all the way around the baggage place and just stares at us full blast as we're walking out, completely not ready to blow. Well, we said goodbye to Gina. I got into my car, I had to drive down the 405 freeway. And I thought to myself at that moment, what a wonderful metaphor that was for what we in the world of education are going through. What I mean by that is, when I got into the teaching world, I was considered an innovative faculty member for my use of technology in teaching. People would come from other colleges to look at how I was using technology to teach my large lecture courses, and even my small courses, but especially my large lecture ones, because I was using this new technology called the overhead projector. Did you not? But it only taken us, 30 years to move the overhead from the bowling alley to the classroom. So we had to make some quick strides with technology and education. And if you had told me then we'd be doing what we're doing now, I would have thought you were out of your mind. There was no way. In fact, all the Rogerian innovation studies said there'd be no way we'd be able to adopt technology as quickly as we have adopted it. Part of the reason it's worked is because it's finally easy enough to use, it's interactive, and so it actually gets to the core connection with people. There are a host of reasons why it actually is easier to do it, but I never would have believed. Who would have believed something like Google would have existed in terms of a resource for us in the world of education to be able to connect with people? And so for many people, we've had to just kind of sit back and be present for this and experience and try to figure out what this is going to mean for us. In fact, this morning was really an effort to take a deep breath, wasn't it? Kind of have some conversations about what this is going to mean for us. But I would pose that you probably have some colleagues who are going through some gorilla grunt syndrome, right? Who are kind of frustrated by all this change and aren't quite sure it's a good thing, and they're really kind of processing it in some ways. And one of the things I like to affirm with people is that quality teaching is still quality teaching. And for us, it's really about new tools in the toolbox, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is one of the reasons we got interested in this survey and this study, was to actually look at great teachers and ask them these questions about the kinds of things that they do and the work that they do. So again, we're going to set the stage, explore the art, talk a little bit about how they recommended we approach people who are going to take on the teaching enterprise in the years to come. The study itself was born out of the fact that we have all this massive transition coming our way. We have a big transition in teachers at all levels coming our way, but in particular faculty and community college, because many faculty in community college began in the late 60s and 70s and 80s, and they're beginning to retire in record numbers. And for us, we have a new cohort of people coming in. It's the right time to ask these questions. We also have all these exhausting technology transitions, And the thing I'm most concerned about is we have reform efforts that have, in essence, if you boil these reform efforts down, their basic message is teacher bashing, right? They're beating up teachers. So there are people, I'm a real fan of learning-centered education, but there are people who talk about learning-centered education by saying it's about being learning-centered versus being teacher-centered, right? And they argue about the fact that you can't be teacher-centered or teaching-centered. And I always say, the operational definition of teaching is that learning actually happens. Those things are really tied together. And if you're being teaching-centered, by definition, you're being learning-centered if you do it the right way. What our studies have shown is that great teachers have always been learning-centered. They've always used whatever tool or technique necessary. And what we've done is, in some ways, we've synonymized the word teaching with somebody who's standing behind a lectern with yellow notes boring people to death. That's not teaching. That's bad teaching, right? Great teachers have always used whatever tool or technique at their disposal they can to try to inspire and connect with people. And the idea for us is to think about how we can connect with them in a different way and ask them questions. So what we did is we began by doing a series of focus groups. We did 5 focus groups with 50 faculty members each in the groups. And every focus group had Teaching Excellence Award-winning faculty members as the audience. So we had 250 of those folks who came through to be a part of the focus groups. Deep dive questions about, and we'll talk about some of the questions today. Why did you become a teacher? How do you connect with students? How do you get content across? How do you assess learning? How do you use technology? And we had those focus groups do this, what was called affinity diagramming processes. We came back and did interactive conversations with them. And then from that focus group, we developed a survey, a quantitative survey, that went out to about 6,000 faculty members around the country, all of whom had won teaching awards in the last 5 years. And then from that, we took the results from that and went back and did another series of focus groups and follow-up interviews to really make sure we got things down to place. And we got a bunch of qualitative resources and video interviews as well to be a part of the book. And the idea was to get their voices into this and get our voices out of the way, if you want to call it that, which is, again, a fun part of the entire process. Let's jump into it right away. What was interesting about this survey is about doing this study is it reminded me of a test that somebody gave me before our first child was born. We have 4 kids. Alexandra is our oldest. Before Alexandra was coming our way, a friend of mine said, "We're not sure you were ready to have a child." We said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "We're not sure. In fact, you need to take the baby test." And so he sent this test to us and said, "If you can pass this test, then you're probably ready." You could probably relate to this if you have kids or grandkids. Okay, the MESS test. Obtain 55-gallon box of Legos, and if Legos aren't available, you can use roofing tacks or broken bottles. Have a friend spread them all over the house. Put on a blindfold. Try to walk to the bathroom or kitchen. Do not scream. This could wake the child at night. That's the first one. Second one was the feeding test. Obtain a large plastic milk jug. Fill it halfway with water. Suspend from the ceiling with a stout cord. Start the jug swinging. Try to insert spoonfuls of soggy cereal, such as Fruit Loops or Cheerios, into the mouth of the jug while pretending to be an airplane. Now dump the contents of the jug on the floor. Then the financial test. Go to the nearest drugstore, set your wallet on the counter. Ask the clerk to help himself. Now proceed to the nearest food store. Go to the head office and arrange for your paycheck to be directly deposited to the store. Finally, learn to enjoy the clothes in your closet today. You'll likely have the same wardrobe when your children graduate from college. And this is one of my favorites. Borrow 1 or 2 small animals, goats are best, and take them with you as you shop at the grocery store. Without using a leash on the animals, try to complete your shopping while keeping them in sight and under control. Pay for anything they eat or damage. And then my wife's favorite is the physical test. Obtain a large beanbag chair and attach it to the front of your clothes. Leave it there for 9 months. Now remove 10% of the beans. Why that made me think of it is these faculty were very clear about reality therapy. They tried to make sure they were clear about not the ideal, this is what you're really going to see in practice. And it was fun to be in their conversations. And I just want to share some of their voice with you for a bit. 1, we asked them, why do you teach? And these are the big clusters of answers that came out. Number 1 reason they told us why they teach, came up again and again in every single focus group, was this idea of making a difference. How many of you feel like that's one of your core reasons for being about it? They deeply connected with that. They were in tune with the idea that they were about changing lives, not making widgets. They called it a calling, they called it a profession of heart, and they spoke eloquently about that connection. And they made the case that it's very hard to be a great faculty member if you're not in tune with that, if you don't understand that you're about changing lives. A number of them talked about what I call the loves of their lives. So they were in love with their subject. They wanted to make sure people had the passion for chemistry that they had, the passion for math that they had. Even though people thought they were insane, they wanted to make them fall in love with English. Whatever they were in love with, they wanted to make sure people were in love with that as well. They loved learning, just the learning process. They loved being around it. A lot of them talked about loving people. This was such a people-intensive enterprise. They loved being a part of it. And a number of them talked about just falling in love with teaching. And I love this line. This is an actual quote. I was born with chalk dust in my blood. Now, I don't know what the dry erase equivalent to that is, but I think you get the idea. A whole other cluster talked about this notion of transformative or tragic role models. Get you in tune with this. How many of you can think of a teacher in your life, faculty members, post-secondary or primary, secondary, who was incredibly inspirational to you, who really is one of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing today, who was really important in your life? You can think of that person, right? How many of you could also think of a faculty member you would not wish on your worst enemy? Okay. What we got in this study was the fact that both of those faculty members were inspirational to these folks. They talked as much about the tragic role models as they did about the ones who were the transformational ones. The transformational ones were incredibly important, but the tragic ones, they were determined nobody would ever have to learn chemistry from somebody like that, right? They were going to be different in that regard, which we thought was really kind of interesting. And then during one of our focus groups, one of the faculty members made an interesting commentary. She said, at one point in my career, I realized that I was one of these. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I really think you've got three choices. Either you can be a transformative faculty member for these students, or you can be a tragic role model for them, somebody who really is a terror, or you can be just somebody they don't remember. She's like, and I decided which one I wanted to be. And she was in the transformative one, the ones who really wants to make a difference. At some level, and I love this quote, she's like, you have to dare to be goofy, right? It's going to stretch you beyond where you're comfortable because you're going to try to reach them in places you wouldn't reach them otherwise. You're going to kind of go to a different place. You have to have some courage if you're going to do that, which I thought was kind of interesting as they went with it. A number of faculty members talked about the personal benefits, and personal benefits is the wrong way to phrase it. I like the phrasing with an authentic fit. They were kind of made to be a faculty member. It felt like they were home when they were doing that kind of work. And did you feel that way? As your work. And a number of them talked about serendipity. In other words, they never ever intended to be doing this, right? And I love this quote. Someone needed a teacher fast, and then I found my soul. Right? It's a neat commentary. Let's listen to some of your colleagues talk about their perspectives on this.
I think what I appreciate most about teaching at the community college is it's a wonderful opportunity because you meet so many students at critical moments in their lives. Some of them have real clear set goals, and then what your job is to do is to help them accomplish those goals they've already set for themselves. But we see so many students who don't know exactly where they're heading, and so through my teaching I'm able to help them discover things about themselves that they might not even know, and help them set realistic goals for themselves, and then send them on their way to accomplish what they've set out for themselves to do. I've always been a teacher. I don't know that teaching is really something you choose to do. It's almost like it chooses you. Like Emily said, if you have the soul of a teacher, you're going to teach because you're drawn to it.
I teach at a community college because I like the kind of student that a community college attracts. That student is tough, tenacious, and one who does not give up despite overwhelming odds.
25 years ago, I walked into the classroom at El Centro College to teach my first class, and sitting in the first seat, there was a young woman about 18 years old, and in the second seat was a 68-year-old woman. And I knew right away that was the kind of place I wanted to be. Students were not all the same, and it gave a real challenge to me as a teacher.
Well, the next things we asked them about was their ideas for connecting with students. And they shared some interesting ideas. One of the key things they talked about was this idea of making contact with their students, meeting them where they are. So a lot of them talked about the importance of learning student names. How many of you make that a real priority for your work? What does learning student names do for you? Makes the student feel like you know or care about them. Does it ever kind of scare the heck out of them when you know their name? Call their name out in class, whoa, better start paying attention, right? It shows you care enough to learn about who they are and what their name might be. Names really matter with students. It's interesting to see the things that really make a difference for these students and how making connection really matters. They talked about the importance of respect, care, and empathy. And one of the things they talked about a lot was empathy means you understand what they're going through, but it doesn't mean playing into their pathology. Okay, it doesn't mean, because a lot of them will tell you these wonderful stories about things that are going on in their lives, but it doesn't mean you're giving them breaks for it. It means you understand the challenges they're going through and you're figuring out ways to help them maybe overcome what those challenges are. Closely related is this notion of real praise, celebration, and reward. And the word real is italicized for a purpose. They said fake praise, celebration, reward. She said the problem is they see through that and can't even imagine, and they know immediately you're not authentic, their relationship gets destroyed. And one of the things they talked about is these faculty members said one of the reasons they don't do the 2-test wonder course anymore is because it only really gives you 2 chances to reward them. That they don't do the midterm final kind of framework, and they have all different kinds of assessment events throughout the entire course, so they have lots of chances to give them real feedback and hopefully find some moments for small wins for them along the way. The idea is to be able to provide some real praise, celebration, and reward, and have lots of moments for that, not just the 2 major feedback moments within your tests. They talked about the important things you know well, things like involvement, participation, and collaboration, getting them to actually get involved with something and connect. And then part of that strategy is for them to make other human connections in some ways, and having them do something helps them learn that. One of the things, for example, one of the things I used to do when I taught interviewing as a section of my communication courses, I used to have students go find a person that they could get connected to who held a job or a position they might want to hold themselves one day. And their idea was to go do a role model interview. They had to go interview and find out how did you get to where you are today and what advice would you have for me? And I told them you could not interview somebody you know. You had to find somebody you've never met before, that you had to make a cold connection to, and then go in and do the interview. And it was amazing how scared they were, by the way, of doing this exercise. And they fought it like crazy, but then afterwards how important it was for them. And they met all kinds of interesting people in this process. In fact, one of my students even interviewed Ann Richards when she was governor of Texas. An unbelievable connection they were able to make. It's amazing how many people will open their doors to you and you say, you know, you're a role model, and I want to learn from you about what you've done. Oh, okay, come on over. It's only going to be a 20-minute interview, come on in. And suddenly the doors got open in all kinds of different ways. Now, they learned the principles of interviewing in that process, but what else did they learn in that process? They probably learned lessons of life, didn't they? They probably made some human connections in that process, and they were involved in the learning process in a deeper way. They were participating. We talked about it this morning. The importance of collaborative learning and participatory learning has to do a lot with the fact that you're trying to teach them social learning lessons, because again, they're more likely to get a job because of their social connections and keep a job because they can get along with other people. So all those things are important in terms of that kind of participation and involvement for the students. This was probably the most universal thing about these teachers that we found very interesting. The other stuff all shows up in all the other literature you see, but these folks were amazingly bipolar. And what I mean by that is they were incredibly strong on high support. They wanted strong support for their students. They wanted to know about them. They wanted to care about them and understand them, but at the same time, incredibly high expectations. They wanted them to perform at a high level. They were not lowering standards. These were not popularity contest winners. They were tough-minded. And it was fascinating to see this juxtaposition of high expectations with high support. And one of them phrased it really well. They said, if you are a teacher with incredibly high expectations who provides no support, you're running a prison. They said, if you are a teacher who is running a class with no expectations and high support, you're running a country club. They said, what you want to have is both. You want to have high expectations with strong student support, and that's the kind of environment where really good things can come out of it. And again, it was amazing how many of these folks, you'd think they were all Teaching Excellence Award winners, and many of these folks had won these awards because they were popular teachers. Absolutely not. It was interesting to see that happen. A lot of them talked about that notion of fostering, this is where I've gotten this term, hardy students. Their idea of hardy learners. They wanted learners who could learn in multiple conditions and in multiple contexts. And part of their personal goal was to have the students leave their class a better learner than they were when they walked in the door. Yes, they're going to learn the content they're supposed to learn, but They're going to be a better student themselves and a better learner as they leave the door. And they really talked about that being a serious goal for them. They talked about taking learning seriously, but themselves lightly. Again, the dare to be goofy side of this thing. They really talked about that a lot. They said you have to get over your ego in some ways to be able to connect. In fact, one of the teachers told this really interesting story. People react to the story differently. I'm going to tell it. She said for the first 5 years of her career, she had a very hard time connecting with students. She felt distant from them. She never could build a bond with them, and she just felt it in her classrooms. And so she had some people who came and kind of did some classroom observations. She met with some people, and she just could never figure out what it was. And finally, one of her friends said, I really need to ask you, why do you make your students call you doctor? And then she went into this diatribe. She's like, well, I worked hard to get my doctorate. I had to go through, I fought all these challenges, and they're going to call me Dr. So-and-so. And she went into this whole tirade about it. I said, whoa, obviously you feel pretty strongly about that. But here, one of my recommendations is you know, I'm a doctor too, I've got a PhD, but I let my students call me by my first name. And part of the reason I do is because I wanted to develop a personal relationship with them in some ways. And I want to be able to connect. Maybe if you try that, it might do something different. Well, she resisted it. She said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so the beginning of the next year, first semester, first set of classes, same distance. And she couldn't figure out what was happening with it. Finally, after a pretty traumatic kind of winter break, she came back and she decided to try that along with some other things. But she decided to stop making them call her doctor. She was kind of becoming infamous for that, how demanding she was about being called doctor. And she let them call her Mary. I still remember that name. She's like, I'll let them call me Mary. She's like, and within a week, I could tell the difference between this set of classes and my other classes. I was able to talk to them in a different way. They talked to me in a different way. I had a different kind of relationship that I wouldn't have had otherwise. She's like, and then I realized, she was crying, she was telling us the story. She's like, I realized making them call me doctor was not about them. It was not about them learning academic respect or learning. It was about me. It was all about me being mad about what I had to go through to get my doctorate. And I was living that pathology out loud in front of my class. And it just caused a barrier between me and my students. And once I got rid of that, I was able to have this wonderful relationship with my students. Now, we had plenty of other faculty members in that audience who said, I still make them call me doctor, and I have a great relationship. This was about her. And the problem was her making him do it had nothing to do with the things she said it was about. It really was about a barrier point with those students. She was able to get past it by taking herself a little less seriously, right? By taking the work, taking the work very seriously. A number of them talked about the importance of walk your talk. Same thing, if you want your students to show up on time, guess what you need to do, right? And if you want their grades, their papers to be turned on time, you better do the same kind of thing. And then be willing to share your joy of instruction in this entire process. And then take the time to learn about your students and understand who they are and the kind of challenges that they have. A number of them talked about the challenge of coming in as first-time community college faculty members, not understanding the context that they're working. This is a quick juxtaposition we did of incoming freshmen at the University of Texas at Austin versus the average community college. The Mobile Community College student at the University of Texas at Austin comes from a strong family expectation background with lots of support, lots of connections, and they have all kinds of mentors. If they want to be a doctor, they know 5 doctors who are already helping them in their process. They've got broad worldview, they've traveled extensively, success experience, incredibly goal-oriented, adversity-free with low work levels, an average age of 19 to 22. Average incoming student at a community college is a first-generation student with little to no support. They have few to no connections or mentors. If they want to be a doctor, they've seen ER, right? They've watched Scrubs, right? And it's just a very different kind of mentality in terms of how they connect. Many are placed down in provincial. They haven't been out of the region they live in their entire lives. When I was vice president at a community college in Western North Carolina, we actually took our students in rural part of Western North Carolina. We took our students for the first time to the PTK conference, the Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. Our students had never gone out of the region to go to the PTK conference. We were only going to Atlanta. And Atlanta is a 4-hour drive from where we were in the mountains. We rented buses, and we were going to take them down to the conference. We only had 11 students who were going to go with us. And I showed up as I was a young vice president, and it was a big initiative of ours. So I showed up on a Saturday morning to see the students off as they were heading down to Atlanta. And I pulled into the parking lot and said, what is happening in the parking lot of this college? There were 300 people there. And there was weeping and gnashing of teeth, and they were hugging each other. And they were going 4 hours away. And what I found out later was that 9 of those 11 students had never been out of the 3-county area we lived in their entire lives. and their family were desperately worried about them going to that place, Atlanta, right? In terms of what it was. Now, you and I can kind of chuckle about that, but for them, it was a big cultural experience. Did that shape their worldview when you're in your classes? Big time. And so the idea is helping them think differently about where they're going. Many of our students in community colleges have experienced significant failures, or they have unreachable or no goals at all. How many of you advise students? You know, what you often find with these students is they come in and they want to get some academic guidance, and they're one kind of students who's kind of bimodal, right? You have one group of students who knows exactly what they want to do, right? And they walk in the door and they go, I'm raising 3 kids, taking care of my mom, and I want to get into the nursing program. I work 35, 40 hours a week, plus I do some work on the side. I'd like to be able to take 22 hours a semester and get done in a year and a half. Is that okay? All right.